Hello and welcome to part 3. Okay, so this is our last part. So the Bay of Pigs invasion, this becomes a critical point when again the CIA begins to lose on a massive scale. So again, only 90 miles away, one of our closest neighbors, and yet we're not able to keep it free from communism. We think this CIA-led revolution is going to kick the communists out. It doesn't, and it becomes a very large embarrassment to the U.S. In 1961, the Russians began to build a actual barrier, a wall, between the eastern part and western part of the city of Berlin because so many people are leaving the Soviet part for the American part. So in many ways, this Berlin Wall becomes one of the most visible symbols of Soviet imperialism and the Cold War. And people were shot trying to get over it, under it. Um, and it is a symbol of the Cold War. One of the closest times that brings the U.S. and the Soviets to nuclear war happens in 62, again in Cuba, when American spy planes, again spy planes, fly over and notice Soviet nuclear warheads. Americans believe that they may be waiting for an invasion or igniting an invasion, so the U.S. has to act. The U.S. begins to talk to the Cubans and the Soviets. The situation gets more tense because the U.S. also has nuclear weapons close to Russia along the Turkish border. In terms of brinkmanship, neither of these people are willing to remove their weapons, so bringing the situation close to igniting a nuclear war. Ultimately, it is resolved when both parties decide to pull their nuclear weapons out. Yet sort of bringing the world close to nuclear disaster, and yet questioning why we have nuclear weapons in the first place. All right, we start to see a change for the better between the Russians and Nixon, although the Russians are involved in the 68 election. They're very much anti-Nixon and are working to promote a different candidate in that election. Throughout the 70s, the Russians are fighting a war in Afghanistan, one of their longest and most expensive wars, and it really starts to bankrupt the Russians. In the 1980s, Reagan is the only president who says that he could win the Cold War. He talks about using weapons and nuclear weapons on the Russians. He also claims to want to build a invisible shield that would blanket the U.S., making it impervious to Russian missiles. This is known as Star Wars, and this is a drawing of that. Now, the program was never made, but it does cause the Russians to think that we are giving all of this money to technology. And we were. Reagan pledged $500 million for development, which means that we took that money out of the mouths of children and people who need it and gave it to the military. But the Russians couldn't keep pace. So this will be a move that, helps to end the Cold War. There is a nuclear disaster in 1986 in Russia at Chernobyl, a nuclear leak radiating the community, radiating half of the globe, actually. And this becomes one of the reasons for an internal reform movement led by Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. He opens up the country. He opens up for more dissent, more free press. By doing so, he is going to help to also bring an end to Soviet rule. By 1989, the Berlin Wall becomes tumbling down by people in the East Berlin, literally taking it apart, wanting reunification with the other side of their city, with their family, wanting a reunified Germany, wanting an end to Soviet rule. And Germany will eventually become unified as one country again in 1990. After that, the USSR dissolves. The Soviet Empire is no more. It's just Russia, with satellite countries becoming free and independent. But it's worth mentioning, throughout the 1990s, there is a Russian experiment with democracy. Um, Russian leaders like Putin, however, use the media to say democracies don't work, money buys everything. Russia is now very much run by oligarchs, by Russian billionaires, and they have been messing with elections all over the world throughout the 21st century, and will continue to play a very large role in global affairs. Um, Let me know if you have any questions on this lecture on the Cold War. Thank you.